All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Matty Colston. It's July 22nd, 2024. We're in Portland. And Matty, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
First question, why wine?
I was introduced pretty young, working in restaurants. Kind of came up in my teen years working at a country club, being a golf caddy, but worked in the kitchen a little bit, washing dishes. Went off to college, and then started working in restaurants more over the summer back in my hometown, Cincinnati, Ohio, and started working as a server assistant at a elevated steakhouse environment, and really got introduced to finer points of like hospitality service. Kind of that old-fashioned steakhouse, Art Deco thing, cigar bar, piano bar, but like, fully dressed up and, black and whites, vest and, all that. And then, there was a lot of wine education there. And I remember there was a guy, Gordy, in Cincinnati, he's definitely like the old guard of wine guys, still doing it, running a great wine distributorship in Cincinnati called Winecraft. And I'll never forget his enthusiasm. Probably 19 years old, 19, 20, working at the steakhouse. And before I could really even legally drink, I was just, fly on the wall for that. And I got to like taste things. It was pretty cool. I went to college for a few years in Middle Ohio, and then to Denison University in Granville. And then didn't finish there, but the moment I dropped out, I was like, I need to get out of Ohio. So moved to Chicago pretty quickly. I was like 21 when that happened. And going to Chicago was like definitely like a big first step in, I went to bartending school at age 21. Sort of one of those like goofy bartending schools. This is 2001 too, so like there wasn't like quite the boom of like craft cocktails or anything like that. It was pretty funny in retrospect, I'll say that. But I was going to Columbia College there in Chicago, studying like music and design, web design, graphics, photography. But there was like a bartending school like right there at the edge of campus, and I remember walking by it and thinking it would be a good opportunity to like maybe go there and get a job in the bar industry. I was DJing a fair amount at the time. I was definitely like doing the thing in Chicago, and I remember DJing at a really great restaurant called Cuba, and that was like my big introduction to like bartending, because I was DJing at the place, and then the bartender and I got along really well, and then they started needing like a bar back, and then I started bar backing, and I started learning more about bartending, and then I just kind of worked my way in there. It was a little more cocktail driven. They had wine too, but did that for a while, and then eventually started working in a restaurant called Boca, the Boca Restaurant Group, which is quite a restaurant hospitality group there. It's another thing that's funny in retrospect, that when it was small in one restaurant at the time, and now, I don't even know how many restaurants they've done now. And I actually still keep in touch with Kevin Boehm from the Boca Restaurant Group. We cross paths occasionally. He's done some really incredible work. So I was a server assistant there. More wine education, being around things, critical tasting. But, I wasn't like a lead server or anything, because I was pretty young, but I was definitely compelled by the industry at that point, Before I really like got into things in Chicago more, I was taking that experience up to that point, and I was just a sponge. I was learning so much so quickly, and I moved back to Ohio actually in 2004 with the hopes of opening my own spot at age 25. When I got back to Cincinnati, I started working coincidentally at another restaurant called Boca, spelled differently, B-O-C-A. And that's really, I was 24, and that's really when things got a little more serious on the wine front. That was fine dining. I was a lead server. The sommelier, Paul, his last name's, I'm not remembering his last name right now. He passed a number of years ago, but being a fine dining Italian restaurant with really strong hospitality emphasis on really blowing people away and being very thoughtful, paying attention to what guests like want and need, and being really creative on how to touch people in a way that's memorable. So this was, I worked at Boca for about a year before I opened up my own bar in Covington, Kentucky. It was called Click. That was like a good combination of like love for wine, cocktails, tequila. It was like, this is 2005. We had like 100% agave tequilas on the list. Great, a lot of Spanish wines, affordable, approachable. Like that era of my early 20s, I was a sponge. I studied, I had fun. I was like DJing. As I was at Boca before opening the place, I actually did do my introduction level with the Master Quarter Sommeliers. Once again, another funny thing in retrospect to think about what I knew then versus what I knew now. Yet somehow I managed to pass, and it was a weekend course in Columbus, Ohio, and I got my introduction certificate. It was before, I think it was before the current iteration of introduction to the court. I think it was a combination of like introduction and intermediate. But got my PIN and my certification, and I was surprised that I passed. I feel like I didn't do very well, but it was a humbling moment. It also didn't feel like, in all honesty, like that was an inspiring experience that made me want to like dive deeper into wine. I really liked where I was culturally with being, in the music world and playing records. And opening up my spot. So I wasn't totally disenfranchised with working fine dining, but I did find myself to be pretty good at it. I started realizing, in a way, the taking the tests with the court, it was a little bit of, proving to my family that what I was doing with my life was valid and in a professional way. Where I was like getting my career started, but it was like turbocharged because I just was so motivated to take these things that I was learning and show them to people and do that in a way that's allows me to be like social, And I think that was a big. Those were foundational things for me, were to be in a social environment that's fun, that's great music, and good things to drink that are, I'm turning people on to do things, which is, over the years, I've come to realize is a pretty core value of mine is getting excited about things that other people don't know about. And I think that was a foundational, that enthusiasm that I've always had has been a lot of important aspects of me becoming an educator, but also being part of the people my age having fun. It was all about not just like other like wine professionals. I feel like I was always connected to people that naturally knew like a little less about whether that's beer, just the whole food and beverage world. And I liked that. So, but I continued to be part of all different things within the culture, not just wine. But wine was certainly the thing that grabs me the most. So I ran the bar for a number of years. Eventually got to a point where it's funny. I guess my life does I shake things up every 4 or 5 years. It's one of those things where it's like it's not because I'm bored. it's because I'm continually motivated to go towards like soaking up more information and experience. I was at a crossroads circa maybe 2008. I was interested in potentially moving to New York City. I had a possible job opportunity with my friend Johnny, who I grew up with, who I eventually did parachute with in Chicago. But yeah, I went to New York, and then I went back to Chicago. I interviewed at Blackbird in Chicago, and I'd already had like my early 20s, being there for like 4 years in my early 20s. Like I was familiar, and I feel like it had like a new energy to it. I was a little older. I was like ready to dive in deeper. But New York didn't quite. It's not that it didn't like cut the mustard. It was just like one of those things where like I felt more comfortable perhaps as a Midwesterner. It's not that I didn't think I had what it took to do the New York thing. I loved being in New York and visiting, but something about Chicago just felt like it was time for like another chapter there. I started working at Blackbird. At that point, I was definitely I was doing cocktail pop-ups in Cincinnati, this was like the real big, like not the birth, but the big resurgence of the cocktail movement. It's when like whiskey they started running low on whiskey because whiskey was just everywhere. People started collecting it, just back when you could, still get Weller for like $15 a bottle, like Weller used to be in the well. Totally different world in the whiskey realm now. But, while doing the pop-up in Cincinnati and visiting friends in New York, there were some New York bars that were trying to get me to come work for them because they were like, we need more bartenders. This thing is like exploding. I remember talking with Phil Ward at Death and Company. I was into the cocktail thing, and so when I got to Chicago and started working at Blackbird, which felt like another really important restaurant group, one-off hospitality, which at this point, those are the kind of points that I look back on, like working with Boca in 2003 and like one-off in 2008. Like these are just really important hospitality groups, and like they were people that I looked up to then and still do now. Getting to work with Donnie Medea at Blackbird was really important. I wasn't there for terribly long, but it was a really important era for me. There was like some kind of unfortunate circumstance that pulled me away from Blackbird, but having some downtime between that and getting hired at Webster's, that was a really important time where it was like I was looking inwards. It didn't feel like the cocktail community, it's not that I felt like I didn't belong. There was just something about the wine community at that point that felt like it felt more like my family than anything. And it was like the light went off, the aha moment when I started working at Webster's. I was like, oh my gosh, these are my people. This is my tribe. So Webster's Wine Bar was a very important moment in my life where, it definitely was an educational period. It's when I got to go on my first international wine trip. I went to Austria in 2009. Jeremy Quinn, the sommelier of Webster's, I can't say enough about him and how important he's been in my life, not just as like someone that like was like an incredible teacher, but as like a humbling experience of like what wine is, this like global, this thing of origin and like the things that come along with the wine production and like why like the wines taste the way they do, not because of concepts like terroir or historical things, but the food and the culture behind it, people. He's a fantastic writer. The list at Webster's was close to 800 bottles, I think. And there was like a paragraph under each one of them. Pretty impressive. Like he was a very diligent, like, writer, and was like always tasting. And the By the Glass program, also had lots of really great tasting notes. When I signed on in 2009, it had been there for at least 20 years. They're having their 30 year this year, actually. They're trying to get me to come out for it. I'd like to, but we'll see. Got a lot on the table right now. Webster's was really important for me. They were the one thing that they were known for was, taking the staff to regions around the world every year. Before me, it was Greece and Germany and many other places. But 2009, I got to go to Austria. 2010 was Alsace. 2011, I did my own trip with some friends through France and Spain, all around, from Lyon down to the Basque region, San Sebastian. Rioja, visited Lopez de Heredia. I'm traveling with two of my best friends that were non-wine people, but I helped curate the trip, kind of the way that Jeremy curated the wine trips to the other places. We went to Burgundy in 2012. We did California in 2013. And in 2014 is when I left Webster's to start Parachute with, I mentioned earlier, Chef Johnny Clark and his wife, Beverly Kim. I was working at Webster's while I watched them meet, and we all became best friends. And I look back at this sort of long, these different chapters, and I kind of go back and forth between learning and then applying. So I still, to this day, almost everything I do, is an echo of my experience at Webster's, because the people in Chicago really loved Webster's for a place that was more bohemian than wine wasn't really put up on to a pedestal as something that's fancy. In the early 2000s, I remember hearing stories of Webster's just being just cigarette smoke everywhere, and it's just kind of a very European bar. And it still, to this day, has that sort of feel of people that enjoy wine and drinking it and trying it, but that's not the only thing that's talked about. I've come to call wine as this social glue, something that brings people together and can inspire conversation. But the conversation always goes to other places, especially when you're surrounded by good food and friends and wine. So up to that point, and then starting Parachute, that's, in a way, the time that Webster's felt like a form of college in a way. And then starting Parachute was a total whirlwind. I was fully confident in what I was what sort of wines I was putting on the list. In Webster's in 2009, Jeremy was a very big proponent of classic wines, but also good farming and agriculture. Learning about not just organic farming practices, but biodynamic farming. Austria in 2009 was almost everybody we visited had, a lot of biodynamic principles being applied. Steiner being an Austrian, maybe that's part of the influence. I'm not sure, but visiting Nikolai Hoff and Vimer Czerny, Hans Czerny, a really fascinating person in the Wagram, makes stellar wines. They're a little hard to come by nowadays, unfortunately, but seeing firsthand rows. I remember taking a photo of in the Vimer Czerny vineyards where there was the last row of their row, and then as it continued, it was more chemical additives, and you could just see the differences visibly of health of the vineyard and more natural changing of the leaves, in the fall, whereas these other ones were still neon green. It was kind of strange. So we got introduced to natural wine also around then. I remember tasting like one of Frank Cornelison's like first or second vintages of Contadino. One of those wines that sort of became an important sort of introduction bottle for many. Frank's wines can be polarizing, but also have gotten a lot better over the years. But I remember, tasting natural wines and, just like, what the heck is going on here? Like, there's such like raw stereo sound coming out of this like flavor and texture. So yeah, by the time Parachute rolled around, I became interested in showcasing these wines, but because of, at that point, like 15 years of studying wine and, having respect for classic regions and classic profiles of appellation. And I had that foundation. So it was kind of cool to like see how natural wine was this like exciting category, but how those wines still were expressive of place and personality. I think, fast forward to now, and there's still that sort of polarization between wines that are unadulterated versus wines that are made to, suit a declaration of origin, whether that's through appellation or just stylistically. I'm really grateful to have all of that different perspective and to, be tasting all the time at Webster's and then even at Parachute when I became a buyer for the first time. I was always going to tastings with my trusty moleskins. I've got stacks of them that I don't even refer to back very often. I think that became a very important part of how I sort of log things in my Rolodex in my mind. Is certain notations, being a buyer allowed me to develop a perspective of what kind of wines are good for Parachute or for the restaurant. That doesn't necessarily need to be something that, not that I like, but of course I like, if I'm choosing it, I like it. But I always made a point to have notations that were like, that I just sort of knew instinctively that that's a wine that would suit the restaurant. And because we were Korean influenced, Beverly, Kim, she's Korean and Johnny's Ukrainian. Johnny, he worked at Le Chateaubriand in Paris, and at that point, I had traveled France, a handful of times, so I got to sort of experience that Parisian Nouveau Bistro thing before we even started Parachute, so that was a big inspiration to what we were doing there. And at 2014, that was like, pretty early stages of that more fun kind of environment where it's not just about like serious, like, I don't know, chefs using tweezers or like being really flamboyant with the creativity, just more having fun with it. And Johnny, someone who I knew from Cincinnati, I just, he was always one of my favorite chefs. And, he had his experience in Korea, and then he landed back in Chicago. It's a crazy story. It's like a whole other thing for another day. But to see how we've always checked in with each other, through the years, and then getting to do Parachute together in 2014, me, him, and Beverly, sort of the three legs of the tripod of like back of house, front of house, beverage, the amount of times I would be enthusiastic about a wine and I would go put it in front of him. And we had this really dynamic relationship of him being creative with food. And I remember treating the By the Glass program there as like a set of tools. I remember choosing Parachute wines for being generous, and like I always just talked about the yum factor. Like there's like a yumminess. There's like this very satisfying nature to wines, but also like there's a textural component. I know the food So like I can see how certain wines fit into the, the sort of generic like blob shaped hole of like what sort of things work in this environment. And I found a lot of those things to be like, wines from off the beaten path, wines from mountain terroirs, high elevation, other extremities like volcanic terroirs, coastal regions, islands, places where there's like struggle of where the vines have to struggle to survive, but there's also the like struggle of the people and the way that they're preserving, whether that's sort of unique native varieties. I think making food and making wine are they're acts of preservation. I can't emphasize that enough. So through those like acts of preservation, creating something that you're putting in a bottle, you're locking in, what happened that year. There's so much. You're locking in information from a grower. One of my favorite things is, and I remember noticing this in Austria for the first time on the Webster's trip, would be like tasting with like Willy Brundelmeyer and like tasting 30 wines, and there's the thread of similarity between each one, even though you've got Gruners and Rieslings from different terroirs and soil types, and you've got everything from entry-level wines to older Altareben, older terraced vineyards that are the great Grand Crus of the Wachau. Some of the wines are just so exciting and compelling, and seeing the landscape, but then tasting through all the different wines and seeing something similar, some similar thread between each one that was like the thumbprint of Willie, or his family, or his it's a name, it's a family name, but it's like a brand in a way too. So yeah, I think that's been a very inspirational thing for me, is to see like how like it's not just this like product of origin, it's like it's people too, and that eventually became like a certain level of confidence that gave me in wanting to start my own project eventually after leaving Parachute. I remember working Harvested Brooks in 2016 while at Parachute. That's sort of where I got bit by the bug. I'd been through a lot of vineyards at that point, and I sort of remember there was always something, like when I was in a cellar or talking with a winemaker, even when I was traveling with Webster's in the more me learning part of the experience. It wasn't envy. I don't know. I just loved like logging everybody's like ethos, and like I loved how like that these products were like this wine was just like a product. It was an extension of like who they were. And as I got older, I used that as a reference to eventually create my own brand, the Colston Biblio brand.
So tell me about, you mentioned obviously you were in cocktail wine, you tried a lot of things. You found that wine was your people, like wine was where you wanted to be. Tell me about that. What about wine was attractive to you, and what about learning about wine and educating about wine made you want to know more?
I think part of my enthusiasm with wine is, let's be honest, it's something that it's a drug. It's alcohol. It gets us drunk if you drink enough. But like, I don't know. It's I think with any sort of, I think that's part of the human condition, is to want to bend our minds. and open them up. And, whether that's like marijuana or like psychedelics or alcohol, like these are all different things that, people are drawn to for various reasons, some more or less healthy. It was a combination of the social aspect of it and how wine was such a catalyst for conversation, and not just conversation, but like art and music, like the way that wine can be a catalyst for so many different forms of art, not just inspirationally, but like on the labels, like the wine, traditional labels might have more font-based expressions of place and origin and appellation, which even to me can be very evocative of place and tradition, but with more picturesque labels, whether you're looking at Mouton Rothschild or like Vietti. Vietti's always been a big favorite of mine for a lot of tradition of artists doing new things on labels every year. Their labels are freaking great. I look back at how much fun I had along the way, but how wine was something that, even emotionally, like would draw things out, or draw me closer to people and establish connections that I will have for the rest of my life. My Webster's people, one of them just did a pop-up at the winery, at the Division Winery, the Bacchanal pop-up, the New Orleans institution. My friend Katie Singer runs it, and we worked at Webster's together, and I got to see her, and we're like texting all of our Webster's friends, letting them know that we're together, and I can even feel myself getting emotional just saying that. Like these bonds are very, very strong. So for me, like it's not just the endless aromas and flavors. It's which is its own compelling thing, like with this thing, cocktails, like, you're making flavors and you're understanding spirits and other ingredients, and you're fusing them together and making something like yummy. A cocktail, though, is like rarely greater than the sum of its parts, where wine has all the flavors. It's endless. Pretty much tasting wine for almost 25 years now, and I still often feel like I'm just scratching the surface. I often feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. And I never understood that, like, attachment of like in vino est veritas. I always say in wine there is no truth. Like the moment you think wine is going to show you something, it will sometimes show you something different. Whether that's a new expression of its place, and that has to do, like I said, with the hand of like man or woman, like whoever's making the wine. Or anybody that's doing it. You're tasting so many different influences on this like weed. Let's be honest, grapevine is a weed. I know this. I just took over 5 rows of Gewürztraminer in Underwood Mountain, and it hasn't been cultivated for 5 years. It's a weed. So controlling this thing to try and coax as much character out of it, it's just as much of a story of the people as it is the juice. It's just it's all those different connections. I love it when I'm around my people. Like I'll go to Chicago and I'll be at my friend Josefa and Mark's place. They're both in the wine importing world. They work for Louis Dresner and Jose Pastor, respectively, and they're just lovely, lovely people. And every time there's a gathering at their bungalow, whether last summer I was there, and Tom Lubbe was there from Matassa, one of my heroes. Like I was, I don't typically get very like, nervous around celebrities. In fact, I like to be less like polarizing. I like to find a way to just be myself around people that are important. And I've been around a lot of winemakers, but there was something about meeting Tom where I was like a little like nervous and excited to meet him. And some of my wine was on the table. And Tom from Matassa is like drinking my Gruner Veltliner and loving it. And like for me, that was like, that's shit. Like I don't need points. I don't need like a review. Like to get feedback from someone like that who has like an ethos of that I respect, where wine is a mysterious thing, Like I said, like there is no truth in wine. That's the mysterious parts of it. When I taste new things now that I've never tasted before, they're just so distinct and stand out. And like I told you, after 25 years, and I'm tasting like brand new things all the time. Like I'm very humbled by that. It's such a bigger thing than me, or and that's why I think like the whole looking at what the Court of Master Sommeliers does, and I remember feeling like that those sort of weren't my people when I was young, when I was 24, like studying to get this certificate. But now I like realize it doesn't need to be this like suit, elevated, elegant thing. I've always just appreciated the more soulful elements of it. I think people kind of know Webster's as like, the people that work there are like the hippies of the wine world. I'm not calling myself that necessarily, but I think it could be this incredibly soulful thing and expressive thing, and the way it bonds people together. That's like the biggest draw for me, I think.
So you talked about other interests as well, DJing, graphic design, art, things like that. Tell me about how that has played a role in wine, and also a little bit about sort of the side career as a DJ and artist.
Well, the DJing thing it never turned into a career. I do still play, as part of my connections. One of my wine labels for my label is a collaboration with people in Detroit, and it's a nightclub. It's called Spotlight, and my rosé, it's called Spotlight Rosé. The owner is one of my best friends. I've known her since back in the Cincinnati days in the early 2000s, and she's doing her dream work now, and she's really moving the needle. Not to unintentional pun.
Good pun.
Yeah, sometimes they just come out. She's doing some incredible things, really lifting up people in the Detroit scene, not just music, but artists, other creators. It's really incredible to see what she's doing there, and to be a part of that, to make a wine with a label that's done by a Detroit artist. Every year it changes. Last year it was an artist, Sheefy McFly. This year it's Kelly Golden. She's a vintage sign painter and has been studying neon making, the old art of bending glass. And if you look over there, that box, that rose there, she made that neon from scratch, and then was photographed to be put on the label to make it look like a tangible, tactile thing. And the wine is like a very big electric rosé. It's not shy. So to have like this neon depiction that was made by someone in Detroit, and then the neon is on the back bar at Spotlight. So people, when they get a bottle, like will notice this thing glowing in front of them, and then look up and see like the actual thing. So for me, that sense of like analog is very similar to analog of like pressing a record and a needle being on the vinyl. There's just more information there. I talk about natural wine and how that's sensed on the palate. For me, it's almost the difference between stereo versus mono. Or I like to talk about those, remember those things when you were a kid, those pin things? You like put your hand in it, or you could like put your face on it. Like it's like a three-dimensional like topography of like your hand or your face or whatever you put like on the pin thing. And I sometimes think about wine that is really expressive and unadulterated and raw as being this like three-dimensional stereographic sense of taste and not just taste and flavor, but like actual just sensation too, like tannins, acid, sweetness. Like thinking about that three-dimensionally is a similar way to how I think we sense beautiful music in headphones. When you get a sense of space, how music is created in stereo, and going to an art gallery and seeing, not just paint work, but sculpture, the way that we sense art with our eyes and music with our ears and food and beverage with our palates. It's all a very tactile thing, and I like to. There was a side anecdote. Like one of the things I did back in Cincinnati after I left Chicago, just a few years ago, I was doing a collaboration pop-up, like a people do like chef pop-ups. I was doing like a sommelier pop-up where I was basically like on the floor on my friend's restaurant with my selections for like a night of service, and I named the pop-up "Make Sense." Make sense. So I look at it as like a verb, like an act. Not, oh, this wine makes sense with this dish. Like make it, like you make it. You give meaning to it. You give intention to the sensing of it with your eyes, your ears, your mouth, anything else people use to sense things. Make sense. So like, I loved like, in each one we did, I tried to give it contextual cues for people to sense wine in a way that I like to think about it. It's not like an easy thing to educate that way. It's like an influencing. I want people. Wine is subjective. Everybody tastes differently. If a wine, I don't like talking about wine like, oh, this tastes like lychee or cranberry or guava. Maybe someone's never had a guava before. So like putting flavors in other people's mouths has never been something that, for me, is about like educating. Is like, it's getting the people to. It's almost like that movie Inception. Like they have to discover it for themselves. So, in order for it to have like the kind of impact that it's had on me, so with that pop up and the idea of making sense, and even with what I'm doing with my own wines. I'm keeping it very open. I mean, just talking about my wines is a totally different perspective, which is why it's like been difficult. I'm very vulnerable around my wines. It's freaking terrifying. Like being a critical wine taster my whole life and then making your own thing and potentially not liking it, or like being like, it's different, but it's kind of cool though, because I'm like, a lot of the things that I'm making, like I've never had before. I've never had, like my current Ramato has, it's an exploration of Pinot Gris every year, but this year I put Riesling and Gewürztraminer in it because I like working off the cuff and I like sort of following my instincts. And the final product is, I've never had a wine like it before. And I'm proud of it, but I'm also like, to show that to people is like I said, terrifying. because like I want to over-explain it or something. But being a learn-by-doing kind of person and starting my wine label back in 2018, just on a total like whim, and like thankfully like with like some of the Oregon wine community, because I was such a proponent of Oregon wines in Chicago while at Parachute, you know, I got to meet people like Janie Brooks and Brienne Day and there's tons of people. But working my first vintage at Brooks, like I said, got bit by the bug. And then in 2018, when I decided to start, I was part of Brienne Day's, team that year. But, earlier that year, I asked her if I would be able to make a wine while working for her, and sort of under her tutelage. I made my first wine, and it was Momtazi Vineyard. That's, for someone who's never made wine and to get fruit from Momtazi, I don't know how I got myself into that position. I guess all the connections and like this kind of, like I said, this like soulful, thoughtful presentation of what other people do. I remember in the early Webster's days, paying attention to what Mo Momtazi was doing at Mea Sera, and we poured the wines by the glass. And I remember being young and like enthusiastic about those wines. Fast forward like not even 8 years, and I'm getting Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc from Mo Momtazi, and I'm making my first wine. But the cool part about being in a facility where there was like other winemakers is I got to. I was often asking all the other winemakers there, and it was a kind of a fun period. Like Corey from Jackalope was there, Ross and Bean Maloof were there, Eric Berg, who runs Ricochet, was there. A couple years later, Colin from Mendivio was there. So like I always like asked a lot of questions. Probably I was probably annoying to most people, honestly. But I would ask people questions, and I would kind of pull all the answers and put them in like a little, stack in my mind, and then I would allow myself to make a informed wine decision on what I wanted to do, just so I didn't make any bad decisions, I think. But yeah, things stayed on track, and I made 175 cases of a co-ferment of Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc from Momtazi Vineyard in 2018. And I did it on such a whim, like I didn't even know what was going to become of it. And then I figured out very quickly, rude awakening, that I had a lot to do to establish myself legally as a winery. And then that was 2019, so I didn't make any wine in 19. And then somehow pulled off 3 wines again at day camp in 2020. Difficult year for many reasons. And then I skipped 21, and then in 22, I worked out of the new division facility here in Portland. And funny enough, all that time, I wasn't even living here full time. I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio. A lot of back and forth, a lot of trust in people to top up my barrels for me. Michael Garofola from Cutter Cascadia has become a really close friend, and we've helped each other out. John House, really, really one of my favorite winemakers, and just people. He's a delight. John, helped me get Muscat in 2020, and I made a Muscat Pinot Blanc in 2020 that I love, and I just think about all those people that I was able to utilize as like resources. I'm like so grateful for that. Like I don't know what I did to like to be so lucky to have like these incredible other winemakers as resources for not just like knowledge, but like to help find fruit. But like here I am, like still doing it somehow. Every year feels different than the last. I get different fruit from different places through the connections. And I never know what I'm doing next, I think. And like I said, that's another terrifying aspect of making wine and being vulnerable around it, but it does feel like the struggle builds character, not just in me, but in the wines too.
So I want to talk a little bit about Parachute. You obviously talked about starting it. Tell me about building the wine for it and running the program while you were there, and then making the decision to try a harvest in Oregon. How did those things sort of come about? How did you end up in 2016 coming to Oregon to work at Brooks?
I loved being a buyer of Parachute because it was a place where I could really put my enthusiasm out there, kind of like the way I opened Click in my mid-20s. I just wanted to share what I experienced. You know, sharing is everything for me. Not just the experience of them, but like in contextual environment. Parachute was like, the food was so freaking exciting. They were just doing such a mashup of like influence of food from around the world, like a raw broccoli salad with like ras el hanout and like dates and like all these spices and crunchy bits, and like pairing that with like, oh gosh, I don't even remember. I do remember one of my favorite pairings at Parachute though. Like I mentioned that the by the glass wines there were like tools. I remember carrying New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough, Huya, fantastic biodynamic estate. Sometimes New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc can be a very generic sort of grassy, grapefruity thing. And I remember that theirs was such a above and beyond example of Sauvignon, of the varietal and the place. So it was kind of cool to have something like sort of, I don't want to say pedestrian, but just something familiar to most wine drinkers. And I remember that they put up this new dish. It was a grilled hanger steak with charred gailan, and the sauce was an emulsion of Roquefort cheese and raw oysters, and then blended with tapioca pearls. So it was like these gray orbs. And that was spooned over like hanger steak, which is a very fibrous steak. It was cooked like on the light side of medium rare. So like bright red steak, and then green from the gailan, and those black charred bits. And steak, everyone goes for red wine. I happen to really like sherry in steak too. Oloroso sherry with a steak is pure magic for me. I don't know what made me go over and grab this New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, but I think I just remembered like the tanginess and the saltiness of that Roquefort oyster emulsion. And my brain just started thinking like white wine might be kind of cool. And I just grabbed it, and it was unreal. I did not expect that. It just sort of unlocked this whole like new like formula that I created, where like I was picking wines that just suited Parachute's food. So like all these other wild pairings started coming out of the woodwork. Kimchi and Bougie Cerdon was another big highlight, because Bougie Cerdon is Gamay, sparkling off-dry Gamay from Eastern France. It's the most delicious wine in the world. It truly is. It's so freaking good. If you don't like it, you can get out of here. But like the tangy, tingly qualities of kimchi and the spicy, it's perfect. And I found that Bougie Cerdon was actually like quite versatile with a lot of other things. We did a boudin noir, which was a blood cake with this seedy salad on top and a raspberry vinaigrette. Those raspberry tones picked up by that, and like the rich iron quality of the blood pudding that has just tons and tons of spices in it. But rich, and like the way that the sparkling wine cleans off your palate. It was so exciting to me that like I couldn't not share it. It got to the point where anyone that ordered the blood sausage, which is sort of an adventurous dish, but was quite tame. I mean, it was delicious, but it wasn't weird or funky. Like it had a deep flavor. It got to the point where I was just literally going around to anybody that ordered it. I had anyone on staff. I was like, if someone orders a blood sausage, let me know. I just went over and poured Bougie Cerdon for them. Just not even like no cost, just here, it comes with it. And people saw that enthusiasm and really, I had so many friends that would come in and just they're like, whatever you want to do. Because I always had like squirreled away bottles in the cellar too. Like there were so many things on the list there that weren't on the list. And that was part of, that was inspired by like going to Vervalet in Paris, where you just start talking to the server, the som, and they realize that you sort of know what you're talking about, and like you have enthusiasm, and then the connection is made, and then they go and they find ways to blow you away with something cool that they have in mind. So receiving that experience in my travels and then giving that experience to people at Parachute was incredibly meaningful for me. In 2017, I was nominated for Best Som in Chicago for the John Bunche Award. Very humbling experience. It was very difficult for me to wrap my head around it. Sort of didn't feel like I deserved it. I don't know if that was like an imposter syndrome thing or like some of it had to do with like my co-nominees were other colleagues that I really respected. Yeah, that was a humbling experience for sure. But that was also the most important part as a segue into walking away from being a wine director and doing what I was doing at Parachute. I don't even understand like why I was like, it's not that I was unhappy. I was just ready to go back to learning again, I guess. I sort of felt like I was on top. And there I was, like sitting, in a suit and tie at the Jean Bunche Awards, like, oh my God, are they gonna call my name? They didn't call my name. And I felt relieved because I think at that point in my head, I knew I was ready to leave. I had, talked to Brienne ahead of time. I was flirting with the idea of New York again. I had some people there, Contra and Wild Air, those guys were trying to recruit me to work for them, and tempted, obviously, incredible restaurants and incredible city. The temptation to go to New York to be at the freaking top of the game was very alluring. Or do I go and start completely over with something I know freaking nothing about? Not nothing, but I chose the latter. I was like, I'm gonna go out to Oregon and see what happens. And I can't believe it's been like 5-6 years since then. And like spending that time in Ohio, doing the back and forth, that's just life stuff. That's COVID, it's relationships. My grandmother was in her last years, and my twin nieces and nephew, I get to spend time with them and a really fun period of their lives. So, but then it got to the point in Cincinnati where I was like, okay, this place is not offering me anything, and I can't keep going back and forth. So I've been full-time here in Oregon for only a year, but I started the project in 2018. And then, just helped L'Orange open last summer with Jeff Fair and John House were part of that. And after Harvest, started working at Heavenly Creatures with Mark Gotelli. I know you've interviewed with him. And that was another moment. It's been hard for me getting some traction here on like how to find my people, my tribe here, because all the winemaker friends, everyone's busy. But yeah, when I arrived at Heavenly Creatures and like saw the kind of wines on the wall over there, it was like, okay, this is my tribe here. And Mark has become like such a good friend, and him and Joel, oh my gosh, I mean, when we get on a tear talking about like wine, we sort of were like, why aren't we recording this right now? Or like, what we need to write an article about this. We talk about Burgundy and like the young negociant producers in Burgundy, essentially people doing the exact same thing I'm doing. I'm somehow making wine every year, and I'm working with amazing organic growers and getting really great root material. So yeah, like I love being able to like have conversations, being part of the hospitality industry here in Portland has been great. And working on the new spot here, really excited to show what we have in store with this. Yeah, so that's pretty much brings us up to right now. Yeah, like going from Chicago to here with some stops in between, it really just feels like at any given moment, I'm trying to just figure things out. And it like never goes away. And but it never stops being exciting and delicious. Ever.
So you mentioned earlier that you made wine before you had figured out the business part of it. So tell me about, after you've made wine, coming up with the rest, coming up with a name and a look and kind of an ethos of your brand. How did you go about that, and how has it evolved?
My friend Emmett in Cincinnati is a very talented designer and has done incredible things in the fashion world, a lot of print magazine. His company's called C90 now. He deeply cares about analog and font work and also like design that is timeless. And we sat down when I left Chicago, but before I started out here, that summer of 2018. And we sat down with the intention of developing my brand, but I sort of hated the idea of a brand. And I remember when he presented the idea of Colston Biblio to me, and my first instinct was like, that's stupid. And he's like, all right. He's like, first of all, you've got a really cool name. It's not a common name. It's a strong name. And everybody knows you for being someone who's super passionate. And you're always seeking out certain things in your life, but sharing with people along the way. He's like, it's a story. Like, it's your bibliography. And I started being sold on it pretty quick. I was like, this makes a lot of sense. And then we decided to essentially present it as a record label. So if you look at the side information of my labels, there's a small catalog number that says CB001. My current tomato remodel lease is CB016 or 16. I've not made 16 wines. Each one of those catalog numbers represents something that I've done. So the first wine that I made was the Momtazi Pinot Gris Pinot Blanc. That was CB001. We put that on the cork. It said CB001 in the font that we created, the Biblio font. That's CB002. It's its own catalog. I'm speaking to archivists, so I'm sure you understand how everything, like product code and things have like a nice little organized place for it. So the way that Emmett explained it to me was that it might be confusing for some folks at first, but over time, you'll have something that will be a body of work. Not just like a resume. A bibliography is, I talk about like root material a lot. Like I use those two terms because, when cultivating grapes, like that's root material. Like, and that eventually turns into something through a lot of different like phases and manipulation, pressing it, macerating it, whatever, putting it in a bottle, working with the distributor, shipping it across the country, landing at a store, and then someone comes in the store and then picks it up because, I don't know, the label's appealing or the shopkeep told my story or something. Smith in Chicago, it's a 3 Michelin star restaurant. I just found out a month ago that they bought 5 cases of my Gruner to put on their pairing menu. And then a friend of mine from Michigan who just moved to Chicago, she just started working at Smith, and she snapped a photo of the dish and told me the dish. Like, that Gruner is called like Gigi, Gorge Gruner. Also kind of a wink at like Grossekovacs. It's very high elevation, like Grand Cru looking site at Underwood Mountain. But it's also called Gigi because I named it after my Nana who died the year before that. Gigi, like she became Gigi, a great grandmother. We all called her Gigi. So there's all these little Easter eggs about my story infused in the labels, the way I work with different artists. I told you the Detroit story with the spotlight, the rose label. It's all there. The story's there. There's it's a lot for, to unpack, and it's fine if nobody ever gets all that. I don't want people to, it's not my goal is to like gush everything about like the root of the wine, why the wine exists. But I guess it's my way of putting the mystery back in it. Or not just putting it in there, but preserving the mystery and the meaning. It blows me away to know that like that GG bottle, which the insignia on the cover were it's a Vesca Pisces symbol. It's 2 interlocking circles, and a friend of mine illustrated it. It came from these silver goblets that my grandmother gave to me posthumously. My mom, she gave them to my mom to give to Matt when he settles, which is kind of funny because I never will. And then my mom gives me these silver goblets like weeks after my grandma passed. I'm grieving, I'm dealing with it. And I'm like, why didn't you give this to me before so I could like thank her for it? So a big part of my grieving process is made that wine for my Gigi in her honor, and the story gets wilder because there's on the bottom of the silver goblets where that symbol lies, it says 1921, which is when they were made. She died in 2021 and she freaking loved numbers. And there's these interlocking circles that are like astral geometry. And then that wine is being poured at a Michelin 3-star stage, and people put a lot of intention on making this dish go around the wine, and like I can't even. It's like almost too much for me to handle because it's just so cool that I did something that meant something to me, and then I released it into the world, and like look what it's done. Like I don't know, it sort of makes me feel like a parent in a way. I don't have kids, so when I make something and put it out in the world, I love how Instagram becomes this thing where people post a bottle shot of something they're drinking and tag me on it. I remember someone from Barcelona, I have no idea who they were, went to New York City and went to a great shop called Orange Glue that focuses on skin macerated orange wines. And my tomato Romano was there, and this person from Barcelona tagged me in it, and they're holding the bottle and they're like, I got it. Like, what? How do you even know who I am? I don't even really feel like I have that much reach. Part of that is, it's not my goal to just put it's not the end result that is the goal. It's I'm just trying to create something that means something to me. And it's pretty rad to see how that all susses out into this organic evolution of something that people get to sense and consume and enjoy or not enjoy. I don't care. I mean, I think my wines are kind of polarizing. Maybe they don't love it, but it's something else. Maybe it helps create perspective, some other perspective. I don't know. But the meaning's all there for me.
So you mentioned your sort of introduction to Oregon, all the people you met and worked with and helped you along the way. Tell me about becoming part of the industry here and sort of finding your place, and about what happens next for you and for the industry around you.
My hope is I can find a little bit more confidence in creating. The connections that I make and the artists that I work with, each label, the Tomato Romano label gets redesigned every year. It's so much more work than necessary. But honestly, earlier this year, I thought I was shutting it all down. It still feels like that's what I should do. if I'm thinking about it from a financial point of view, because I'm completely underwater. I'm in debt. It's like, and the wines are not flying off the shelf. And because I'm staying involved in hospitality and working on opening, this wine bar, the wine label does not sustain me, not even a little bit. Like it does in a sense, it does like with what's important to me, but like it does not like pay the bills. And it doesn't, if I continue to do things the way that I'm doing it, it doesn't seem like it's going to get better. But all those bottles that are like sitting in my warehouse, like they are assets. Like I hope they'll sell. I do need to like get more distribution, but distribution, you have to sell FOB. Like you have to sell pre-wholesale price. But I don't want my wines to be $60 on a shelf in New York. I want them to be $30, so anybody can have them. That's like so important to me. My friend Emmett, who helped the Colston Biblio thing, like he's like, why don't you sell your wines for $80 a bottle? Some people do that. There's culty wines out there where they start with the price first. Yeah, I probably could do that, and maybe they would actually sell better. And maybe it would sustain me a little more, but my wines being available for an affordable price is important for everybody to be a part of it. This is a huge can of worms, like the whole business side of it. But it's very, very expensive. Not just the fruit, it's like working, I work out of a facility, I have to pay to use all this equipment. I don't have my own winery. Even if I wanted my own winery, that would just cost a lot of money. Yeah, it's like, and the running joke is if you want to make $1 million in wine, start with 10 million. It's a total money pit. And I feel privileged to have even gotten this far. Yeah, I've managed to stay afloat for this far, but it's still, this whole time, I've just barely got my head above water. So it would be sad if I had to dissolve it. I'm trying to, opening up the wine bar is going to be something where, my wines will have a presence there, so maybe they'll get some more attention. I'd like to open up more distribution, but like I said, to sell FOB prices, we're talking like, I have to sell for like $14 a bottle. My cost is around 10. I'm making $4 a bottle, do the math, making 150 cases of that wine. And I think that the most frustrating thing for me because I want, like everybody has to keep the lights on. When I sell it to a distributor in, the East Coast, it has to get there. They pay for the shipping. And then they have to mark it up, and then they have to keep their lights on. And then they sell it to the shop, and the shop has to mark it up because they have to keep their lights on. I don't think when people realize, and to preface this, independent wine shops are the most important thing. They're doing a lot of legwork. And, I mention independent wine shops is because you're talking directly to consumers, and then they're going and consuming them in their own atmosphere. But at a restaurant, it's a different story. There's different things happening, way bigger markups. My wines, I've seen one of my wines for almost $100 on a list before. That same bottle I sold for $14. I know, it's funny. It's practically funny. And I'm not being critical of like markups. It's just the system is not designed to support the people that make the damn stuff. And then you've got like, things like glassware that like may come from China. I had to pay tariffs on glassware, 4 years ago. Yeah, like I said, it's a real can of worms. So opening the wine bar here in Portland is going to be a really big step in having a platform to show the wines, try and keep them locally, try and sell them locally. But also at the same time, try and get a little bit more distribution. I'm gonna take a little bit more. I'm going to give myself a little more credit. I'm going to try and sell the wines for FOB a little bit higher and just be okay with them being more expensive in other cities, because that's what it takes. For if people want the wine in New York City, people don't realize when you buy a wine in a shop, you are paying for shipping. But you can buy my wine on my website. I work with Vino Shipper. I did a lot to set up the technical aspects of wine being drop shipped out of my warehouse in Salem with Wineco, and working with Vino Shipper for my online compliance. It ships if you live on the East Coast, it will be there within the week. But shipping, people will get to the checkout and see that shipping a case of wine is $120. And that's because FedEx and UPS, their prices are unreasonable. And ground shipping, talk about the heat of the summer. Right now on my online site, I set it so where you have to get that next day air. And that's $150 at least. But the wine stays safe because it's in the air, and it's anyways, like I said, I don't want to go on this whole tirade, but consumers, I'm not selling very well on my website at all. People are not used to buying wine on websites. They want to go to the shop or the grocery store, convenience. And everybody wants to pay for convenience. And none of that is helpful in keeping my project going. I'm doing everything I can to try and make it work, but that is the one thing I'm realizing is, if I can have the wines be a little more noticeable here in Oregon, then that helps my bottom line. Yeah, but then I mentioned, I'm so excited to have my wine at a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Chicago. That's currency for me, for my heart and my mind. But it doesn't encourage the the project to keep going. I'm unsure of so many different things, but because of what's important to me and what I'm passionate about, I will just keep trucking along as much as I can. Yeah, it's difficult being part of an industry where the financial aspects seem so errantly displaced and not in the favor of the people that make it. I don't mean to sound so ominous or negative, but yeah, and I know that I'm certainly not the only person that feels this way. There's other people that are really voicing. Patrick Capello down in California, another former somm turned winemaker. He's starting to make a little bit of noise about American winemakers and supporting American wine. Yeah, we'll see.
Last question for you. Tell me about what you haven't done in wine yet that you want to, or what are something in the future that you hope to accomplish?
Visiting more. I'd love to go to Cyprus and Lebanon. I'm really fascinated with islands, Sardinia, Corsica, Canary Islands, Azores. I've done some travel, and I'm grateful for the traveling I've been able to do, whether that's Webster's or an importer trip. But I'd love to do more travel, find a way to, I've always dreamt about, maybe there's a way I can be someone like Jeremy Quinn, who was my mentor in some regards at Webster's. Maybe I can take other people on trips. Maybe that's part of my sharing, where maybe that's a way of helping sustain what I do, is by being able to take trips and explore with people on their dime. I don't know. Yeah, I certainly don't have a lot of financial resources, but I have a lot of people resources and connections, and it's kind of silly, but joking around with a friend the other day, what would be your chosen superpower? Some people want to fly or be invisible. For me, I wish I had the superpower of linguistics and being able to speak any language, which is there are what is it, a polyglot? Is that, yeah, polyglot. I'm not that. Like, I speak some Spanish and some French. My Spanish is decent when I'm immersed. In France, I can, get a room and order dinner and wine, obviously. But, sometimes, gosh, I'm sighing because Bourdain has been like a huge, huge, huge inspiration for me. And there's many times I feel like I haven't even dealt with my grief from someone who I've looked up to, who like is a proponent and stands up for people like me and cooks. When somebody who you look up to can't do it anymore, it's difficult to know that, because I feel a lot of the pressures of life in my own realm. So when I look at what he did as a journalist, I've considered, like I almost pitched a TV show idea to Vice last year before I fully decided that I was moving out here. And I've been on Vice Munchies. I traveled Korea with Vice Munchies. And I'd love to continue to educate people. Maybe there's a way I can do it by involving other aspects of media. There's a million food travel shows. How many beverage travel shows are there? I mean, I love what Tucci's doing with the Italy thing. He talks about beverage a bit in there, but he's also Stanley Tucci, and he's a badass. Love that guy. This is all just me daydreaming and fantasizing. I sometimes don't think I'd have the courage. Sometimes I feel like I don't have what it takes. Sometimes I feel like I totally have what it takes. I love inspiring people. I love talking with people about these things. I'd be lying if I said that wasn't like a dream of mine, would be to share like the love of making connections through wine and travel. If there's a way I could share that, that would be pretty cool. But it feels like a pipe dream.
All right. That's all the questions I have for you today. Sorry to end the interview on such a downer note.
It doesn't feel like a downer note.
Okay, good.
It feels like a ... And,
it does feel like a ...
And that's the way I try and like leave many things. It's open-ended like that.
Any questions I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't talk about today that you wanted to talk about?
No, I feel like I got a lot across that I wanted to tell you, and then some.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
For sharing your time,
Yeah.
and sharing your story with us, and sharing this new space with us, which I'm excited to see how it turns out.
Yes,
so,
indeed.
Appreciate that, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thank you.
Thank you.